Hello, hello. You guys can grab your seats. We want to get started. Right. Except I hate that P word. I am not going to call you the P word. The elected officials in the back. All right. Scott, we good to go? So welcome to District 17's Town Hall. Thank you all for coming. It's a glorious day, so thank you for coming inside. How many of you are here at the Rockville Science Center for the very first time? Yeah, that is one of the reasons why I thought we should have it here. Especially while science is being disrespected and ignored, this is the right place to gather. So we're going to introduce some of our friends from the Science Center in a little bit, but before we get started, can I ask you to make sure that your phones are silenced? And we are going to tape for live stream later, but not now. And the goal of this, okay, Adam's going to do a selfie. No, we're going to do a non-selfie. Oh. So the goal of this is for you guys to have a sense of what we accomplished this session, our 90-day session, and then to hear from you and have your thoughts, your ideas, your reactions. And we are in the midst of a crazy 4-year term. And a crazy, what are we up to now, 122 days or something like that? Too many. Whatever the number is, it's way too many. And we have been working to try to undercut, undo, and address some of the things that have been done at the federal level. So you'll learn about those. Before we get started, and each of us will spend a few minutes telling you about what we've done, I want to recognize our many wonderful elected partners, because what we do is largely possible because of our federal, state, county, and municipal buddies here. So I see Council Member Andrew Friedson. Thank you, Andrew, for taking time to be here. And I'm doing this without a list, which is always a little dangerous. We have former Delegate Kumar Barve, now on the Public Service Commission. Still around, still working on policy, and so grateful. In the city of Rockville, we have our wonderful mayor, Monique Ashton. And we have council members, Barry Jackson, Adam Van Graff, Marissa Valeri, here, and maybe we'll have others in a bit. And from Gaithersburg, we have council member Jamil Hernandez.
Max.
I'm getting. And he's everywhere, he's all the time, he's everything. Our Montgomery County Sheriff, Max Wee. Our Central Committee are the hardworking Democrats making sure that we are effective. And District 17's newest Central Committee member, Jovi Lopez, just walked in. Thank you, Jovi. We appreciate you. And with that, we are going to get started, and the person kicking us off is someone who has been called a baby delegate, but his presence is far from small. Ryan Spiegel, as you all know, served on the Gaithersburg City Council for a long time, was the statewide Maryland Municipal League president, and just hit the ground running. He's on the Appropriations Committee, which this year, with our tight budget, was an enormous challenge. And since that is the biggest bill and the most important bill that we pass every year, we thought we'd start with the Appropriations Committee and our presence on it. Delegate Ryan Spiegel.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Senator. Thanks to all of you for taking your time out on a beautiful weekend to be here with us, and for your advocacy, activism, and engagement. It's so important to us. I don't want to stand in front of my team here. It's so important to all of us that we be able to connect with all of you, hear your concerns and questions. And so we're really grateful that you all came out. And that's why we decided, even though we do speak at a lot of different community organizations, municipal meetings, Chamber of Commerce meetings, nonprofits, we wanted to host our own town hall for us and for you. So again, we really appreciate you all. I also want to mention at the start those who haven't necessarily heard of the breaking news that former President Biden has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, and I want to send our prayers and wishes to him and his family. I know there are a lot of different views about what went down in the 2024 election, but personally, I feel that he was a fantastic president and got a lot done for our country. And so we just want to send great wishes to him and his family for all the best. As the senator mentioned, I serve on the Appropriations Committee. I consider that a great honor, but it has been a great challenge as well. I remember in the summer of 2023 when I received the appointment to fill former Delegate Barvet's seat. No one can really fill his shoes, but I filled his seat. And was appointed to the Appropriations Committee by Speaker Jones in the House of Delegates. I was thrilled because I'm going to move away from the speaker because I think that that's what's causing the feedback. I was thrilled because at the time there was a pretty good situation as far as we understood with the budget and the economy. We were getting a lot of help from federal investment in the wake of COVID and federal support to all of the states, not just Maryland, billions and billions of dollars, again, thanks to President Biden and his allies. So I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to get on the Appropriations Committee. I'm going to be able to make it rain in Rockville and Gaithersburg. We'll bring back all this investment. It'll be terrific. And then, of course, within 3 weeks of that appointment, the governor had to come out and announce very serious concerns about the prospects for our state budget. And that's why we have these jobs. We have to get to work when there are tough times. It's easy to govern in flush times, right? It's easy to govern when there aren't any challenges. That's not what we're here for. We're here to be able to tackle these challenges with our priorities and our values. And so being on the Appropriations Committee, the most important bill that I work on, and I would argue the most important bill that all legislators in Annapolis work on, is ultimately the state budget. Our state constitution has only one requirement every year that the General Assembly must perform. All of the other bills are discretionary. The one thing we must do is pass a budget. And it must be balanced. Unlike Congress, we must balance our budget and we cannot rely on endless deficit spending. So with that mandate in mind, we were facing a really, really, really challenging situation in Annapolis this year. Some of you have read a lot about it already, heard a lot about it already, but I just kind of want to go over the basics so everybody understands where we were and where we are now. When we first started the session, President Biden was still president, actually. The current administration didn't come into office until about 2 weeks after the legislative session had started. But because of a number of factors, including sluggish economic growth in Maryland and really in many parts of the state, national and international inflation, and other issues that were weighing on our economy, we had a projected almost $3 billion shortfall. And when I use the word shortfall, or you hear the word deficit in Maryland budgeting, bear in mind what I just told you. We are required to balance our budget every year. So when we talk about a deficit, we don't talk about a pre-existing deficit. We're talking about a projection into the future for the next year or the next several years, what we think we're going to be able to collect in revenues versus what we feel we are likely to need to spend on our priorities and our programs and services and values. And so this is a projected deficit of almost $3 billion that we're facing. Many veteran legislators were saying this is the worst budget situation they had seen in 20 or 30 years. So it was a very serious situation. With that in mind, we get to Annapolis, and within a couple of weeks, the Trump administration takes over, and suddenly we've got an additional roughly $600 million added to that projected deficit because of all of the drastic, draconian, often unlawful, indiscriminate layoffs and cuts to important federal programs. So that added an even bigger challenge to an already existing challenge. So facing that challenge, we had to figure out a way to make very, very severe cuts, figure out how to potentially generate some additional revenue, and reach the right balance so that we could continue to maintain the services that Marylanders rely on, but still address this projected shortfall. The governor's initial proposed budget, which was presented to us, contained extremely severe cuts, specifically some very, very, very rough cuts to our services for those with disabilities, our services for those who need childcare subsidies and assistance, which I would argue is not just something that we ought to be doing because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's an economic development generator. When people have a place that they can bring their kids, they also can then work in the workforce. And it also contains significant cuts to healthcare and other services. So we were facing these challenges, and we were hearing from many of you and others in our community who were saying, look, we get it, it's a tough year, there's going to need to be cuts. But we have to find a way to balance that, and we have to find a way to preserve our core priorities so that we're at least preserving some significant portion of the services that Marylanders rely so much on. Those services become even more important at a time of economic difficulty. That's when you really need them. So that's the least appropriate time to be cutting them in a way, right? So we were fortunately able to work in the Appropriations Committee with colleagues in the House Ways and Means Committee that my two House colleagues serve on, and the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee to reach a compromise. Is everything in the compromise wonderful? Am I happy about every little thing in the voluminous state budget and its related documents? Of course not. That's what compromise is. But in doing so, we were able to cut $2 billion out of the state budget. We're able to generate roughly $1.6 billion in new revenue, which my colleagues I'm sure will talk about from the Ways and Means Committee side. And we were able to preserve most of the core services that people rely on, like those disability services, investments in healthcare, investments in childcare, investments in education, investments in certain economic development programs, investments in transportation. We have a separate transportation trust fund. It's sort of a separate central fund that funds a lot of our investments in bridges, roads, pedestrian and bicycle pathways, and other transportation services, and of course including transit. And that separate fund was also facing a lot of pressure and potential deficits. And because of some tweaks to our vehicle fees, we're able to preserve and add another $500 million a year to that fund so that we can continue to invest in transit and transportation and safe bridges and good quality roads, all of which I would also argue are not only important for public safety and for quality of life, but also for economic development here in Maryland. And so again, it was extremely difficult. I'm not happy about every piece of it, but I think given the circumstances, we were able to come together as a General Assembly and pass a budget that is going to allow us to preserve the quality of life for Marylanders, the core services for Marylanders, and move forward. And that includes, by the way, investing in our local communities. We are fortunate to represent a district that is made up of two large cities, and work closely with our two city governments, who are both phenomenal. And it is important that we make sure that we bring home the resources and the investments so that our city governments, our local communities, our nonprofits can continue to thrive even in a difficult economic environment. So we were able to bring back $1.2 billion in direct investment to Montgomery County and its municipalities in education, transportation, and public safety. And we're very, very proud of those investments as well. I'm happy to answer additional questions later on about specific projects and capital funding, because we have a bunch of capital funding that we were able to bring back as well, which is really important to invest in our communities. So thank you all again for being here, and I'm going to pass the baton.
Ryan surely has a lot more to say because he passed two bills this year for the first time, and you'll see a little bit later about some of the projects that he helped us bring home funding for. But we want to make sure we have lots of time for questions. So I noticed that Rockville Council Member Zola Shaw came in to join us. Thank you, Council Member. Next up is Joe Vogel, he's on the Ways and Means Committee, and they work in partnership with the Appropriations Committee, and both he and Delegate Palakovich Carr serve on the Ways and Means in very different roles, actually, with very different priorities and subcommittees, but they are both so smart and so hardworking. We're very lucky to work with them. Joe Vogel's up next.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, baby delegate. You did a good job. It is so good to be with you all today, and thank you to the Rockville Science Center for allowing us to use this just fantastic space. I was up here earlier today, moving around some chairs, and I saw there was a group of elementary school students that were here on a Sunday learning how to do math, right? So I learned a little something, okay? So it was cool.
Maybe delegate now.
Yeah. So look, I want to thank all of you. I think we are at a moment when our democracy is really being tested, and I think about this a lot, right? There are folks just a metro ride away in Washington, D.C. that would really wish that you weren't here right now, that you weren't willing to participate in this democracy and hold leaders like us accountable and hold leaders like them accountable. And if you weren't here, that safeguard, that guardrail of our democracy wouldn't be here either, right? So thank you all for taking the time on a Sunday. You could be doing anything else, but you are choosing to participate in this democracy, and that deserves a round of applause for you all. So this was my third session of the General Assembly. It was very different than the other two that I experienced in a number of ways. The challenges were significant. The one that comes to mind right away is that just a couple weeks into our time in Annapolis this year, there was a new president sworn in, and the dynamics very quickly changed. And we saw communities that we care deeply about here at home come under attack in a number of different ways, and we saw the federal workers that, as someone that grew up in Rockville, my neighbors were federal workers, right? Our neighbors now are federal workers, people who have devoted their lives, their careers to serving this country, were all of a sudden getting fired. I was with a friend of mine who worked as part of a program at USAID, and her mission was addressing and preventing the spread of HIV/AIDS all across Africa. All of a sudden, that program was cut off. Those patients, right, those individuals that were relying on the US government to help them, all of a sudden had no support. And it was our neighbors that were facing the brunt of that in terms of their employment. So we had our work cut out for us. And I'm proud to say that we took a number of steps this legislative session, both to protect federal workers. We passed a bill to provide $10 million in assistance to those federal workers for bridge funding, right? As they go to find their next job, what is that assistance that they can rely on? And a number of measures to protect immigrant communities here in our state. One of the bills that I'm proud passed both the House and the Senate was a bill to protect sensitive locations. Right? This was a directive that was already in place under the Biden administration, where if you are in a hospital or a church or a school, ICE shouldn't be able to target you, right? So we, in day 3 of the Trump administration, I think they repealed that, right? We were able to keep those protections here in Maryland, and I'm hoping I don't believe the governor has signed it yet, but I'm hoping that he will. We also advanced a number of protections. I'm proud to have sponsored a bill that passed out of the House to secure protections for labor, for workers in our state. One of the first things that President Trump did was fire the National Labor Relations Board General Counsel, who had instituted, I actually sponsored this bill last year before the NLRB instituted this policy, which banned captive audience meetings. If you're not familiar with those, we can talk about it later. But these are the tool of choice right now for union busters. And they're very effective. If you remember the Mercedes-Benz plan effort to organize, I believe it was in Alabama, they were holding these captive audience meetings until the night before, and they were able to defeat that union. So one of the first things that the new NLRB General Counsel did was repeal that protection. So it became really important for Maryland to have protections in place for our workers and join, I believe, 14 other states in passing that law. So we passed it out of the House. We got it very close to passing out of the Senate, but we weren't able to get it done. We'll bring it back next year and get it done. I want to talk about just one more thing before I turn it over, which is, this current administration ran on the promise of lowering prices, lowering costs for Americans. I don't think they've been delivering on that, right? Things are a little more expensive than they were 120 days ago. But we in the General Assembly took steps, delivered actionable legislative progress solutions to lower costs for Maryland families. So, for example, right, on healthcare, on prescription medications, one of the first bills that we passed was to expand the authority of the PDAB to lower the cost of prescription medications. One of the first executive orders that President Trump did was actually to undo progress on lowering the cost of prescription medication. We passed a number of bills to lower the cost of healthcare here in our state, including protecting some of the provisions that were in place during the Biden administration that are surely going to get repealed. We took efforts to address the rising cost of energy in our state. We've all seen it in our utility rates. I know our commissioner's here, right? He's we're not going to hold him responsible, but this is it. All right, great. So, but we worked hard on this issue, including passing two big bills. One, the Next Generation Energy Act, that makes strategic and smart and environmentally conscious investments in the generation of new energy here in our state to address issues of supply. And just a fun little anecdote here in terms of this bill, there was a hearing, right, where folks from one of the utility companies came and they were talking about a number of things, and one of the questions asked was whether they thought it would be okay for ratepayers to subsidize their use of a private jet to fly from Pennsylvania to Maryland, Pennsylvania regionally, a private jet. And they said, yeah, we need it. We need a private jet. We don't think that our ratepayer funding should be going to their use of a private jet. So one of the provisions of the law is now that they cannot use ratepayer funding for their private jets, right? And you will also see, thanks to the work of the legislature, actually direct relief, money back in your rates, $80 approximately per household this upcoming year in direct relief for energy costs. So I can talk more about the bills. I passed two bills, one to address the fentanyl overdose epidemic, one to invest in entrepreneurship, tech entrepreneurship in our colleges and universities. Another bill that we passed, I think it was a team effort, to change a licensing provision when it came to alcohol licenses so we can open up a new restaurant that's been having a hard time opening because of that here in our district. And lastly, I just want to say thank you for sending with me these fantastic fellow legislators who just work so hard and work collectively, all of us together, to deliver for you all. So it is my real privilege to get to work with all of them, and I'll pass the baton back over.
Our senior delegate is Julie Palakovich Carr. You know her here in Rockville from her tenure on the Rockville City Council, where she worked on public safety, Vision Zero, and then brought that statewide, and has been responsible for so many thoughtful initiatives. And she is not only on the Ways and Means Committee and in leadership there, but she is the chair of the Montgomery County delegation, which is herding cats, a lot of cats, with a lot of priorities and needs, and she does a great job with that and so much more. Please join me in thanking and welcoming Delegate Julie Palakovich Carr.
Thank you, Senator. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And I'll admit, I think the holdout on our team. I still like doing these Zoom meetings, but there is something really nice about being all in the same room together. I'll say, if you haven't had a cookie from Sunflower Bakery, when we get to Q&A, people should definitely mosey over there. They're delicious cookies, and they are not free if you have an allergy. So just sharing that. So, as my colleagues have mentioned, there really were two major challenges as we came into this legislative session. And one was definitely the state's finances, and I'm going to talk about what we did in terms of helping to fill that hole in addition to the $2 billion in budget cuts that Delegate Spiegel spoke to. But the other really was being prepared for what was going to happen in terms of this federal administration. And I think it's worth noting that we weren't starting from scratch. Thankfully, here in Maryland, during Trump 1.0, our predecessors, when Senator Kagan was in office and others, then Delegate Barbe, our state passed a lot of protections on a lot of different issues to protect us and to insulate us from what was happening during the first Trump administration. And so those things are still on the books. They still carry forward, and I'll admit, when I talk with and interact with legislators in other states, a lot of the times they are looking to what we have done here in Maryland because we passed a lot of good laws. But that didn't mean the work was done. And unfortunately, this administration continues to be very creative about the new attacks and the new horrible things that they are doing. I'll say even since session has ended, I feel like I have 3 things on my agenda already for next session of things. It's like, okay, we gotta plug that loophole now. Next. One of the areas we haven't addressed yet was on healthcare, because we knew that there were some important steps that needed to be taken this session to protect Marylanders on that front. Thankfully, an overwhelming majority of Maryland voters voted last fall to enshrine abortion and reproductive rights in our state's constitution, and that is phenomenal. So this session, we wanted to make sure that, yes, everyone has the right to an abortion. We wanted to make sure that funding was not an issue in terms of people seeking reproductive health care. So actually this session, thanks to Delegate Leslie Lopez, who represents the area just north of us, north of our district, we passed first in the nation legislation that creates a fund that uses some extra insurance funds that are basically sitting around, not being put to a good purpose, so that there's funding available for any Marylander that needs it. And again, that was first in the nation legislation. Another important action we took on healthcare was ensuring that Marylanders, regardless if they have private insurance or if they have public assistance with their insurance, continue to have access to preventative services, things like vaccinations and your annual checkups and those sorts of things, so that regardless of whatever the federal government does on that, people will still have access here in Maryland. And I'll say one other area that there were a number of bills that we passed this session in regards to healthcare is medical debt. Unfortunately, 1 in 5 Americans have medical debt, and this is not a debt most people choose to have. It's because they've had an emergency. It's something unplanned, but you need to do. You need to have it taken care of. And oftentimes we're talking just a few $100s of debt that people are carrying. But unfortunately, it can have a very big impact on somebody's credit score and their ability to, say, get a loan to buy a new car or a used car, to rent an apartment. These types of things actually even show up when you're applying for a job. Oftentimes, potential employers will pull a credit report on you. So we passed several bills on that front, including a bill that I sponsored that actually was modeled off of actions that the Biden administration had taken, but unfortunately this administration rescinded very quickly, just a few days into their administration, that keeps medical debt off of credit reports, so that, again, that's not showing up and being held against you for this debt that really you didn't choose to take on necessarily. So let me move on and talk a bit about what we did in terms of revenues. So as we mentioned, $2 billion in budget cuts, and about $1.2 billion in new money that we raised. And that's somewhat through taxes, somewhat through fees. It really ended up being a hodgepodge of things. And for folks who might have been following along, there were a lot of proposals this session about where that money could come from. At the end of the day, a lot of those didn't pass. It was good that we had a big menu of options on the table. And I'll say, as somebody who personally has been sponsoring legislation on this front since my second session, so 6 years now, to have some good progressive options on the table to make sure that our very biggest corporations, that our very wealthiest residents, really like the top 1%, we're talking billionaires and millionaires, are really paying what they truly owe in taxes. Ultimately, the package that we passed, I think, was a good one. It wasn't just about raising the money. It's important to note that the actions that we took, especially on having, say, higher income taxes on incomes above $1 million, on incomes above $500,000, this is also about tax fairness and tax equity for all of the rest of us. Because really up until this year and these actions that we took, we had a tax system where the very wealthiest 1% of Marylanders paid less in taxes, when you added up all the different types of taxes that they pay, than all the rest of us. And that just, it's not fair. It's not fair to all of us working people. So I'm really proud of the actions we took on that front. At the end of the day, 94% of Marylanders will either see a tax cut or no increase in their income taxes. 94% are going to see no change there. And I'll say just in the last couple of days, a national think tank actually did an analysis of the actions we took this session, and it really underlined and underscored how we took the right steps this year. Their projections are that 82% of those new income tax revenues are going to come from that wealthiest 1%. Again, millionaires and billionaires are disproportionately going to be making up that difference in terms of the income taxes. There's a lot of other things I can unpack in what we did on raising money. I'll save those details if folks have questions during the Q&A or for afterwards. So let me just touch on a couple of other topics. So one of my leadership roles is as chairing the Early Childhood Subcommittee in the House, and we oversee policy regarding childcare, preschool education, and really early childhood education and libraries. And going into this session, we knew we had a big task on our hands. Our comptroller, Brooke Learman, put out a very good report just before session that documented the current state of childcare in Maryland. And unfortunately, we were going in the wrong direction. We've actually lost a quarter, 25% of our childcare workforce in just the last few years, and 15% of the childcare businesses in our state. So we're trending in the wrong direction, and unfortunately Maryland is doing worse than many other states in terms of recovering from the pandemic. This was an industry that was particularly hard hit during the pandemic. So we knew there was a lot we needed to do, but unfortunately we also knew that there wasn't money. So we've tried to be very creative this session and taking some actions that would be meaningful, that would help these mostly small businesses, most of which are owned and operated by women, to stay in business and to be viable, so they are providing good, high-quality education for our very youngest students in our state, enabling their parents to be part of the workforce. So we took a number of actions on that front, everything from looking at how we could creatively reuse state properties, potentially as locations for childcare institutions, providing better access to health insurance through an existing small business program for childcare workers. And then one of the bills that I sponsored, and that's already been signed into law, allows for counties and municipalities to offer a property tax credit of up to $10,000 a year for childcare providers. So that's home-based or center-based providers. And that can make a meaningful difference to their bottom line. Oftentimes these businesses have a profit margin of just 1 or 2%. So those kinds of things that are gonna help them along. And then lastly, another big issue on education this session really was starting to think ahead for what's going to happen with our state's landmark education reform bill, the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. And I feel like I'd probably talk about that at every town hall that we have each year, but it's such an important law in our state and sets quite a vision for where we should be going for public education in Maryland. And I'll say this was actually the 3rd school year since we passed that law, and we are really starting to see the benefits of the investments that we are making in our public schools across the state because of that law. Unfortunately, Maryland had been really dropping year over year in the state rankings. If you look at 4th grade reading proficiency scores or math scores, and we were actually 40th in the nation for reading scores for 4th graders. Because of investments we are making in the Blueprint, and also because of a policy change, thanks to our still relatively new state superintendent for schools, about how reading is taught, we've actually jumped up to 20th. Just within a couple of years. So we're seeing really promising signs from these early investments in the Blueprint, and I think it was important that we continue to invest on that front. So for all 4 of us, education has been such a priority, and I think where we ended up landing and the compromise on that front was really important to make sure that we are staying the course, maintaining those investments, and especially making sure that we are focusing investments on the students who need the most support, whether it's because they're learning English as a second language, whether it's because they're getting special education services, or for schools that have high concentrations of poverty, which include some of the schools right here in our district. So thankfully, that's all going to be continuing on. I think with that, I'll wrap up. I'll just say lastly, I was very proud that 11 of my bills passed in one form or another, whether with my name on them or Crosswell's name, etc. But it was a good session. I think we got a lot done, and looking forward to the questions.
She's too modest, and I forgot at the beginning, but Julie just was selected and honored with our Rockville mayor as one of two of Maryland's top 100 women. That's a big deal. Among the other people that we work closely with who have entered the room, Gaithersburg Council Member Lisa Henderson, thank you for joining us. And our former friends and partners, allies, former Gaithersburg Council Member Yvette Monroe, and former Rockville Council Member Virginia Onley. So thank you all for making the time to come. So my turn. And then we're going to hear from the Science Center, and then we're going to hear from you. So Joe is going to play advancer here. I'm going to run through some things that you've heard about a little, and we'll go a little deeper, and some things that you haven't heard about yet. So among the many, many, many horrific things that I call it the Trump-Musk administration has done is the disrespect for our heroes of January 6th. So I have been working now for a year with Sergeant Equilino Gunnell, and I was so privileged to bring Sergeant Gunnell as well as Officer Michael Fanone, Harry Dunn, and Danny Hodges to the Senate to welcome them and to have them meet with the governor. In Pennsylvania, they went to Harrisburg, and there some of the Republican legislators booed them and got up and left the chamber in protest. Astonishing. These are American heroes, and it was really an honor to have them. Federal workers have been a priority. Joe talked about how they are our friends, neighbors, constituents, and we have been taking actions to make sure that we can help those who have been laid off or in danger of being laid off. My committee is education, energy, and the environment. We also do elections, ethics, and so much more. We have a lot more bills than any other in the Senate or House, and the numbers bear this out. Triple E, that's my committee, and you can see that's larger, our number of bills, significantly larger than any other in the Senate, and then obviously in the House. That is me chatting with the Senate Budget Chair and making sure that he knew what our priorities were. Nonprofits. I am often described as the senator for the nonprofit sector, which is such an honor. Too often people say, well, what are we doing for small businesses? And I say, yes, and what about our nonprofits? They are about 13% of our workforce, 14% of our economy, and too often they are overlooked. I sponsored 3 important bills. We were able to get 2 of them all the way through and signed by the governor. They were the priorities of Maryland nonprofits. The other one, a revolving loan fund for solar panels and stuff on nonprofit roofs, which is such a good idea that Jamie Raskin got my idea added to federal legislation. It is federal law. We have passed it 4 times through the Senate. Can't get it out of the House yet, but we are going to keep working because I think it's a really good idea to reduce their energy bills while also reducing our carbon footprint. I want to give a shout out to 2 of my staff, my chief of staff, Matthew Jeweler, and my legislative aide, Jordan Loring, are here, and Jordan and I, okay. When there was a sneak peek that the Dobbs decision was going to be handed down by the Supreme Court, that is where Jordan and I first connected, and we were down there protesting. And Delegate Palakovich Carr gave a great explanation of our funding, and we are going to continue to offer women reproductive choice in Maryland. I think many of you have heard me talk, maybe ad nauseum, but how 3 people have died in my district when 911 has failed, including my friend Carl Henn, who was an activist, environmental activist, and the greatest guy, who was struck by lightning in a freak thunderstorm and died when 911 was overloaded. And so for the last 11 years, I have been working on 911, and we have moved Maryland after my chairing a statewide commission for 4 years and passing a lot of laws, enacting a lot of laws. Maryland's at the forefront of shifting to next generation 911, including this year, including this year. It took, I think, 6 or 7 years, but we have finally increased the penalties on if there are cyber attacks on our 911 centers. Literally life or death, and we need to make sure that that there are consequences and there is disincentive. I made a commitment to visit. We have 24 counties in Maryland, and there are 24 911 centers, and I said I'm going to go to every county and meet with every 911 director and talk to the 911 specialists, the courageous women and men under the headsets who save lives and property every day. And so Calvert County was my 24th one. The Maryland Association of Counties and the Secretary of Emergency Management, everyone made a really big deal out of it. It was wonderful. I was really proud, and I have learned so much. I am now chairing a statewide commission on 911 specialists. Again, we want to make sure that they are being better compensated, pay, benefits, retirement. all that, mental health care, everything. So 988. It is disappointing and worrisome that still people don't know what 988 is. So it is a free, confidential, 24/7, 365 hotline for suicide and mental health prevention, for outreach, mental health care. So please, 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 especially the young people in your life who may be struggling, please make sure that everyone knows about 988. So one of my bills that the governor signed made a better connection between our 911 systems and our 988 to make sure that those calls can be quickly and easily transferred. Really annoying is when we have outdated, offensive, or sexist language in our laws. For about 100 years, Barry knows this, MSFA was the Maryland State Firemen's Association. And I used to kind of tweak them about it. And then I decided it was really annoying. And so I started working to try to get them to change it. And last year, by three votes, their membership finally voted to change it to the Maryland State Firefighters Association. So same acronym, right? This should be a no-brainer. And then it turns out they were in the law books as the old name. And so they asked me whether I would sponsor the bill. I was like, oh yeah. And so as a matter of fact, it just got signed last week, and I brought the stickers, the bright pink stickers that say, I heart Maryland State Firefighters Association, and the governor and the president and speaker, and we all wore those as he signed that bill into law. Energy costs, I think we've had some conversations about that. Delegate Vogel, former Delegate Barve, we have a lot of experts in the General Assembly. It's a top target. The governor also just vetoed. It's going to be a continued conversation. Climate is in the domain of my committee, always something that we work on. We have to address our climate crisis, and the challenge is the Trump administration is rolling things back, and they say, yeah, let's do more coal. Let's not use straws. Let's not use, anything that makes sense, electric vehicles and any of that. He wants to undo anything that's common sense, but we keep working on it. Education, that is the superintendent of education that Delegate Palakovich Carr mentioned, and our state teacher of the year, and the blueprint for Maryland education. Just want to be clear, when Democrat Martin O'Malley was governor, Maryland ranked, what was it? Oh yeah, first. When Larry Hogan became governor and started cutting and trimming and not filling slots and undoing and all that, although if it was good stuff, he took credit. If we did it, then he took credit. But he vetoed a lot of bills, including the blueprint, all that. And that's when we slipped to 40 and have to claw our way back. So education is vitally important for our future. I am very proud to have been the first legislator outside of Baltimore City to endorse a guy named Wes Moore in a 12-way race when he was at 1% in the polls. And I'm so proud of him. Even when we don't agree on absolutely everything, he's smart, he's hardworking, he listens, he collaborates, totally different from the way Larry Hogan used to run the state. Many of you may recognize that this is Rockville's own Jenny Stepanek. I learned about, we go sometimes to national conferences or regional conferences, and the National Conference of State Legislatures last year, I do a lot of consumer protection, and I learned about a growing movement called Right to Repair. And so I decided to sponsor a bill, Right to Repair wheelchairs. Because there are some folks, if I did Right to Repair everything and it was cars and electronics and farm equipment and all that, we would have had every lobbyist coming in, and that would have been complicated and controversial. So I said, we're going to start with something really obvious and really important to a small segment. But it was important because if you use a wheelchair to get to a doctor's appointment or your job or a family reunion and it's not working, you're out of luck. And it might be weeks and weeks and weeks before it can be repaired at some factory or warehouse. So this enables modest repairs to get done locally by small businesses easily without undercutting a warranty. Immigrants, obviously, ICE, with that, my colleagues have spoken about some of that. It's an ongoing conversation, and I think we are all appalled by masked anonymous people snatching folks off the street, and with no due process. Elections are one of my lanes. I think I had 11 election bills this year. We passed, I think, 8 this year, and everything from changing the date of the primary election to allowing more folks to vote for a Board of Ed, and some of this isn't worth going way into the weeds, but we still have not been able to get special elections passed through the House. It has passed through the Senate unanimously multiple times, but when there are appointments, the Senate believes that voters should be electing their legislators rather than political parties selecting them. So we'll see if we can get that through in the future. There are a couple others that didn't move, but all the others have been signed into law. Thanks to Delegate Ryan Spiegel and Gaithersburg Council Member Neil Harris, and some of you perhaps who are active in homeowners associations. There are so many that do things well. Homeowners association, condos association, co-ops, and they are run by thoughtful, caring, inclusive people, and some, as in everything, some don't do it well. And so we increased the transparency, made the election process less prone to conflicts of interest, and so we passed a really good HOA bill, and Ryan sponsored a local bill, and I did the statewide bill, and I'm really glad that that worked. Sometimes new legislation takes multiple years to pass, and this passed in the first year, so that was cool. And same with wheelchairs, that happened in 1 year, it's amazing. Anti-Semitism, the numbers are shocking. It is by far the highest audience of the victims of hate are Jews. And Rockville, thanks to Mayor Monique Ashton and the city council and city staff, Free Gaza was graffitied in 2 places in Rockville, and it was taken down right away before State Highway even could get there. And so we need thoughtful and responsive leadership to make sure that hate is not in our communities. Our Governor, Wes Moore, is very clear that hate against Jews, blacks, gays, Muslims, Asian Americans, there is no place for hate in Maryland, and so we are continuing to work on that. Joe Vogel passed a bill, Delegate Vogel passed a bill last year on a hate bias commission, and that was an important part of that conversation. So we have to stand united in our unity. United in our, that's really good. United against discrimination and hate. I have not been sleeping well lately. Congress, we have a new U.S. Senator, Angela Alsobrooks, who's kicking butt statewide and showing great leadership. And 3 new members of Congress, April McLean Delaney, who represents the Gaithersburg portion of our district, Sarah Elfrith, with whom I was honored to serve with in the Senate, and Johnny Olszewski, former county executive in Baltimore County, and they are all doing great stuff. Sometimes you pass a bill and you think that's it, check the box, we're done. It's not always the case. So if you see a bait and switch, gas price gouging is what I called it. It took 7 years to pass it. You see the cash sign, and then the credit sign is on the ground, often behind a bush, behind a parked car, not illuminated. Makes me crazy. You come in and you think you're paying a less expensive price. 90-something% of us pay for our gasoline with credit or debit. And so we don't know what the higher price is going to be, the real price that we're gonna pay. There are places in Montgomery County, in Rockville, that are literally 25 cents per gallon more if you don't get the car wash, or if you don't pay in cash or something, in cash. So, styrofoam. Then Delegate Brooke Learman and I cross-filed and sponsored and passed a ban on styrofoam in food containers. It's terrible for the environment, it's terrible for public health. Don't ever drink a cup of hot coffee or tea out of styrofoam. When you're on vacation in another state that has it, you are drinking cancer. I beg you, don't do it, and it's terrible. So that's why we asked everybody to come with their own water bottles and stuff. There are still places in Maryland that I have been offered my leftovers in styrofoam, and so we are still working on getting rid of it. 311, I passed another bill this year. We've been working towards it, and we are launching the next step. 311 is non-emergency needs of government. And a lot of Marylanders don't have it. 6 counties, Montgomery, Prince George's, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, and St. Mary's have it. The rest of the state does not. I would love for there to be statewide. As many as 50% of the calls into some 911 centers are not for emergencies. Where can I get a flu shot? What day does my recycling get picked up? What are the library hours? Like really basic things. And as much as I can be a little queasy, a little nervous about the privacy and other issues surrounding artificial intelligence, this is the right use for it. Because the examples I just gave, a computer can tell us that. And if you don't have a computer or don't speak English or don't have easy access or there's a power outage, so many reasons why calling 311 is just going to be easier and you can get the service you need. So we are continuing to work on that, and the Department of Information Technology has been a great partner in that. Some of these folks are in the room. We love them. So this is this is the Maryland Municipal League, and I have to brag on Delegate Spiegel and me, and we all care about our municipal partners in Rockville and Gaithersburg. But Delegate Spiegel and I were just named, included among the 5 out of the 188 legislators as municipal champions. And we're getting an award. No, that's this. Okay, that's the list, yes. The list that Ryan didn't go through now, this is some of the ideas of some of what we were able to get. And again, Ryan's leadership on the Appropriations Committee is really important in this. $4.5 million for our schools, and Sunflower Bakery, we got them a new truck for delivery and all that. It trains and employs people with disabilities. And the cookies are fantastic. If the cookies didn't work, but it was a good cause, I'm not sure I would buy them as often as I do, but the cookies are amazing. Okay, Montgomery History, new building. You are going to rush to go see it. Yep. And upcoming hometown holidays this weekend, all these other things. Gaithersburg Book Festival, we've got to give a shout out to Mayor Judd Ashman, the founder and head of the Gaithersburg Book Festival. Yesterday was the 16th annual, and as always, it was amazing. My fabulous team, some of which are here, and I think that, if you are not on getting our stuff, make sure you sign up, or you can use the QR code. And I'm all over social media, and I do have to wrap up. So do that. Thank you. And so that's my portion. We want to take a lot of questions from you, so thank you for that. But I want to bring up my friend. There's Ulysses, there's Howard, there was Kyle, and there's Abdul at the Rockville Science Center. And so before we take your questions, really quickly, Ulysses, it's awesome. What happens in this place? Why should they know about it, and how can they engage? In like 90 seconds.
Yes, thank you. So this is Rockville Science Center. We do science and tech education for kids, teens, and adults, and even seniors. So we offer clubs, camps, online lectures, and all sorts of cool activities all throughout the year, and our flagship festival in April every year, Rockville Science Day, the largest STEM event in Montgomery County. And that's kind of a laundry list of the various things that we do here. And how you can engage with us, visit our website, rockvillesciencecenter.org, and check out our calendar. We have things going on all the time. We're very friendly for nights and weekends, as well as some things during the daytime as well. So thanks for being here. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our wonderful representatives who really do a lot for us. And really a place like the Rockville Science Center and these science and tech hubs can only really thrive in a place like ours. So thank you all for being here.
And now it's up to you. So we'd love to hear your questions, and we'll toss it. We'll probably divide and conquer here. And if any of you want to sneak out and get a cookie or two while we're taking questions, I'm going to ask a couple of things. First off, we want to be respectful. We want to be inclusive. No long speeches. And but we definitely want to hear your thoughts. So if you have a question and you're called on, First name, last name, where you live, and briefly what your question is. Yes, Ross, why don't you start us off?
Yes, I'm Rosalind Rivera. I'm District 17. I live in the Vogel area around here. Thank you so much for
I
coming
think
and
they
briefing
need the
us.
mic.
I'm going to repeat it.
I'm sorry. I'll speak up a little bit. I just wanted to ask you about the infrastructure things that are going on, like the Key Bridge, and whether the new Trump administration and their cuts have affected anything like that in Maryland.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you for all you do as a Democratic leader in the Twin Brook area. And she was asking about transportation, infrastructure, and whether the Trump administration is going to be undoing, rolling back. You mentioned the Key Bridge, and I assume you're talking about the Baltimore Key Bridge, not the one that goes into Virginia.
Right. Yeah.
So we were lucky that got in under the wire with leadership from Biden administration and Secretary Buttigieg and stuff. But you want to take that, Ryan? Budget issue.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that at the state level, we were able to put an infusion of money into our transportation trust fund. So for projects funded by the state, we're going to have hopefully enough money to at least do the basic major things that we need to be doing as a state. But in transportation in particular, and in a lot of other areas, we rely heavily on partnership with the federal government and making sure that we get funding from the federal government. I am thrilled that the Biden administration and Congress at the time were able to pass federal legislation guaranteeing full payment of the reconstruction of the Key Bridge. That project is moving forward with a major contractor who has been selected for design build. You've probably seen on social media the last few weeks, there's been a picture of the proposed design, and they're starting to look for subcontractors. But I was just talking with Mayor Ashton from Rockville about the new concern, which is that the Department of Transportation, the federal Department of Transportation, is now reaching out to local governments and other grantees and saying money that you have been awarded is conditioned on you agreeing not to do any DEI. And so that's the next battle in our lawsuits, in our advocacy, in our other work to make sure that that nonsense doesn't continue and that our local governments like Rockville and other local municipal and county government departments are going to get the money that they're entitled to from their federal grants.
Yeah, Ron.
Hi, I'm Ron Tipton. I live right down the street at Newmark Commons, right around the corner from Cheryl. My question is this, and it goes to all four of you, any of the four of you. $2 billion were cut from the budget. What programs were either reduced or eliminated that you feel strongly we should try to restore and that we could work with you to do that?
Great question, thank you. Ron Tipton from Newmark Commons, my friend and neighbor, wants to know about the billions of dollars that had to be cut in this year's budget cuts. Which do we want to try to bring back that we should all be looking to bring back in the future? I'm going to toss it to Delegate Palakovich Carr.
Yeah, well, thankfully, a lot of the deepest, most harmful cuts that were originally on the table, we were able to reverse with the additional revenues we were bringing in, but not fully. I think one good example of that is the Promise scholarships, which are for low-income students attending community college. That was proposed for a fairly deep cut, but in the end, we were able to restore most of it, but that still was cut by a few $1 million. That's just one example, but that's certainly a program that I'm looking ahead for next session on. I don't know, Brian, if you want to add anything else.
Joe. Joe wants to add to that too.
So the budget process, I think, was a very iterative, right? We were going back and forth over the course of session. As Delegate Spiegel alluded to at the beginning, the initial proposal, none of us were really happy with. And there were a few pieces over the course of the session that were being discussed as, hey, let's keep this in, let's take this out. One piece that was very contentious and touched our committee was related to education, and it was collaborative time. So there's this goal under the blueprint of shifting the amount of time that educators are in the classroom versus time that they're training, preparing for future lessons, that they are grading, right? The goal is to shift it from 80% to 80% in the classroom, 20% on their own time, to 60-40. That is considered to be a practice that would not only help them, but also enhance the quality of education, make lessons better, allow for better grading. I talked to a teacher recently who was saying, I teach 150 students, I come home at the end of the day, I'm grading all night, I have no time to spend with my family, right? So not only is it good for the educators, it's also good for the students. So one really important piece here is that Montgomery County had already made some of those initial investments to move us here towards collaborative time. So when the cuts were going to be more drastic, that was really going to hurt Montgomery County. So we were able to delay those, I don't want to call them cuts, but delay that process so that those cuts, let's call them cuts, don't take effect immediately, but in a year or so. So I would like to see that be brought back at some point in the future. That funding to move towards collaborative time was cut, but we were able to minimize through our advocacy the most harmful impacts on Montgomery County.
Let's take a question from the back. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Tiffany Delegates. Two quick questions. First, will you override the veto on the bill to study reparations? My second question is, thank you for bringing up the literacy issues that we are having. Will you, along with other Montgomery County legislators, call for a hearing with MCPS to see how they are going to mitigate the literacy cliff that's coming, which will require them to hold back third graders who do not meet literacy standards?
Thank you. Tiffany Kelly had two questions. One was about literacy and one was about the reparations task force that the governor just vetoed. So I think I'll go first on that one because it went through my committee on reparations. Complicated. Racial politics is complicated, are complicated, and America's history has so many shameful chapters, and we need to be able to have conversations about it, and yet this White House is all about shutting those down. And so the challenge is, how do we make sure that we can stay in conversations and educate young people? The idea that hundreds of books have been removed from the Naval Academy Library and other libraries around the country means that young people, that students aren't going to be learning about the important chapters in our past so that they can be leaders and advocates and have the hard conversations. So, Tiffany, our governor has made clear that he doesn't think that it was time for a task force. He wanted action. So speaking just as one senator, there are a couple of things. First off is, will there be a conversation about overriding a veto, and or I'm curious to see what the governor has in mind and what legislation he might sponsor. So thank you for the question. Anything on literacy?
I think we all voted for the initial.
Yes, and we all voted for it, yes. Okay, Ellen, you had a question.
Oh, I can say literacy.
Literacy, okay, literacy and then Ellen.
Yeah, and thank you for raising that issue, Tiffany. I think it is probably time for us to get an update from NCPS on what the plans are. The context for everyone is that in the last year at the state level, they did pass a new policy in regards to third graders should be on grade level for literacy, and if they aren't, those students can be retained. Now, there are some, let's say, outs in terms of that policy. So if a student is getting special education services, for instance, they might not be automatically retained. If the parent doesn't agree, they're not going to be retained. So I think maybe the numbers under the policy that ultimately was adopted probably is not as big as what we thought the universe would be initially, but I think you're exactly right. It probably is time for a check-in to see what the board's talking about at this point.
Thank you, Delegate. Ellen.
Hi, Ellen Ryan from Twinbrook, and this was obviously a difficult session for you all in terms of cutting and deciding what to cut, and I don't think it's going to get any easier next year. So how are you preparing for next year's budget, which will probably be worse in terms of what's coming up from Washington? And what can you do in terms of bringing in money, perhaps from economic development, which I think we desperately need, especially here in Montgomery County, where the county executive is not a great fan.
Okay, Ellen Ryan's question was about next year's budget, that we've just gone through a really hard journey with this year's budget, but next year is unlikely to be any easier because more cuts and the more trickle-down awfulness from the Trump administration and economic development. Our county executive is not such a fan of economic development. So, Ryan, you want to start us off?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Ellen and I were talking earlier about the fact that if you believe in important social programs and the government's role in helping people who are vulnerable, you need to have a strong economic policy and a strong private sector in order to be able to fund the tax revenue that helps pay for those programs. So I appreciate the question. This year's budget sets aside $2.4 billion for a rainy day fund, which is pretty solid and puts us on a much better footing than we were at the beginning of the session. We're going to end fiscal year 2026, which is the end of which is next year, with about $350 million in cash. So we're going to be on a much better footing. The unknown is how much worse the Trump administration can make it. I think if they don't do anything drastically, worse, then we're probably going to be okay. Or even if they do a few minor things that make the budget and the economy worse, we're going to be okay. What happens if they do something really drastic? Obviously, we're very carefully watching the federal debate over Medicaid. We spend about $15.5 billion on Medicaid in Maryland alone. 1 in 3 children rely on Medicaid. 1 in 3 people with disabilities. 5 in 8 people who are in nursing homes rely on Medicaid, and the vast majority of that money comes from the federal government. So if they start slashing that, then we're going to have a real serious talk about what you're talking about. Whether there will be a special session, whether we'll have to make some other drastic changes, we don't know yet, so we're in a wait-and-see posture, but believe me, we're paying very careful attention, and we're hoping that rainy day fund that we have will at least keep us afloat with emergencies in the foreseeable future.
Since you mentioned county executive, let me remind everyone that next year is an election year and we are getting a new county executive. There are a lot of talented people who are running. Make sure that you listen and learn and do your homework and make sure that we can choose someone in the primary and then hopefully in the general who will be effective in Annapolis and statewide and nationally and internationally in bringing jobs and economic development and working with the county council. That is, in my opinion, not what we have had in the last 7 years. Just one quick sec. Our governor, in terms of economic development, has just had a trip to Asia. He's got other trips that are scheduled or he's looking at, and he is focused on bringing cyber jobs, biotech, opportunities, and defense. Interesting. So he is focused on bringing home some wins and some jobs and companies to Maryland. So that's very exciting. And I know that we're all ready to partner with him on that. Yes, Troy, you want to? Sure.
Yeah. Sorry, two quick things, and thank you. You are very engaged with us during the legislative session, so I want to appreciate and thank you for that as well. On economic development, I had a number of bills to address some of the burdens that are holding back our small businesses in the permitting and licensing space. So I worked on a bill last year that passed that created a founders fund for climate technology companies here in the state. And after session, I said, I want to go visit with some of these companies, see the work that they're doing. There's actually one right here in Rockville that could be $1 billion company soon one day. They're right now just in a little warehouse off of 355. So really exciting, but almost every business leader, business owner who I met on this tour expressed frustration with licensing and permitting and just how long it takes them to get a license and a permit. So I introduced 2 bills. One would have created a complaint portal through the Department of Commerce where you can, after you fill out everything you have to fill out, after you've completed your application, after 60 days, since you completed your application, if it takes longer than 60 days, you can submit a complaint that gets elevated within the Department of Commerce to one individual whose job it is to help you address that. And there's a report at the end of the year. So I partnered very closely with the Chamber of Commerce because what we want to see with that report is where are these delays? Is it a state agency? Is it a county? I know it's not the city of Rockville, but is it a municipality, right? And the second very quickly would have created a one-stop, or Gaithersburg, sorry. The other would have created a one-stop shop so that there's one place that businesses can go. And here in the city of Rockville, if you're trying to start a business, you're looking for city licenses and permits, you're looking for county, you're looking for state, depending on what you're doing, you might have to go through a federal process. So one place that you can go to and see everything, we're working very closely with the Department of Information Technology on it because we get these fiscal notes when we sponsor a bill that tells us how much it would cost. And someone said it would cost $500 million. And I said, no, it won't, right? So I think we're clarifying exactly how to make it happen, but we're working towards it.
Speaking of one-stop shop, one of the nonprofit bills I referenced that I passed a couple of really great nonprofit bills, both of which were first of its kind in the country, created a nonprofit navigator. We have about 41,000 nonprofits in Maryland, and if they don't know whether they're eligible for this grant or contract, or they haven't gotten their check, they haven't gotten paid yet for this contract that they did. They don't know the right person to call. And so there's gonna be someone in the Department of Commerce who's gonna be able to help solve their problems, and that's really exciting. First of its kind in the country. Okay, Councilmember Van Gra, oh my God. Okay, Troy, sorry. Okay, Troy, you had a question.
Yes, I'm Dennis Ford. I live in the city of Rockville in Town Center. Rockville makes about 50% renters. I was wondering what can we do to work with the four of you to get the same protections that Montgomery County residents have with rent stabilization, because we don't have it and Gaithersburg doesn't have it. So I'm wondering what can we do to work with you all to get our mayor and council to pass that?
Well, I'm going to take this one briefly because I want to let our council members wrap this up. So, valid question. It's something that the Rockville Mayor and Council have been discussing and debating. There are advocates on both sides and concerns on both sides. There is a question about economic development and how affordable our housing will be. Mayor Ashton has been doing extraordinary work on creating more affordable housing around our city. And so working closely, Mayor Ashman as well, in Gaithersburg, of course. We had the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development do a tour. We went to Rockville and to Gaithersburg, looked at the sites, because supply and demand is like basic economics, so we need to have more supply. So last two questions, and then we'll stick around if you've got questions. Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Van Grack. I'm gonna let Adam go first because he was here before you, and then you wrap us up with love, Lisa. But go ahead.
All right, just real quick, hope I'm not being presumptuous. I know that a lot of other delegates and senators around the state are announcing re-election. I was wondering if you all are running for re-election coming up.
Ooh, there's a question. How do we want to answer this, folks?
Answer it.
No.
I think we can say,
Stay tuned for news.
stay tuned, watch your social media in the coming days. And maybe delegate.
We are going to make an announcement, you know.
Okay, in the next few days. Watch your social media. We're all over the place. Councilmember Henderson.
See what happens when you let Rockville?
Yeah, Dan.
Two questions, please. Delegate Spiegel, thank you for your statement on the AAA bond rating and the slight reduction. If you can talk to us about what will be any predictions in the future on that rating.
Yeah, you're right. We should have.
And then my second question is, in terms of how is the General Assembly working with the Attorney General? There's a lot of cases against the administration, the current administration. Some Maryland is leaving, some joining with other states.
Yes.
How is the General Assembly?
Great question. So Councilmember Henderson wanted to know about both the bond rating. Maryland just was diminished from AAA, which was a big deal, but the United States was also diminished. Second question was about working with the Attorney General, Anthony Brown, on all the lawsuits. Please.
Thank you for the question, council member. First, on the question of Moody's, which is only one of three different credit rating agencies. Moody's recently downgraded the state of Maryland from AAA, which is the highest, to AA plus or AA1, which is the next highest. It's not great news. I'm a little disappointed, but it's not horrible news either. Fitch, which is another organization, another one of the credit rating agencies, kept us at AAA even after Moody's announcement. And I believe very strongly, as you know from my statement that you referenced, that 90% of the reason we were downgraded by Moody's is because of the Trump administration and all the terrible things they're doing that will disproportionately impact the state of Maryland and our economy. So as long as we continue to push back and fight back against that, I think our state economy is going to get through this, even though we are going to have rough times. 2 days later, Moody's downgraded the federal government after 108 years of giving the federal government a AAA rating. Now the federal government has a AA plus, but unlike Maryland, now all three credit rating agencies have downgraded the federal government. So my prediction is, much like with the Maryland change, unfortunately our Republican colleagues are going to try and figure out a way to blame Maryland Democrats for the downgrading of the federal government's credit rating.
Yes, and as to the Attorney General, the work of Attorney General Brown and his office is clearly a very important part of our state's response to federal actions just in the last few months. And this session, we did give additional resources to the Attorney General's office and some additional authorities to pursue those cases. So they have filed a lot of lawsuits on all of our behalf and are doing great work there.
And council member, I think this is actually a great question with which, it covered a lot of what we've discussed today. I think you see the contrast, right, as Delegate Spiegel was just getting at. The actions that we took this legislative session to protect Marylanders, protect our economy in light of what is happening, or with what's happening coming from the federal government, the layoffs here in our state, the threats to take away funding from Maryland. And you have some of our Republican colleagues we've seen over the last few days blaming Democrats in the state for that downgrade. No, it's the federal government's fault, right? And now we're seeing the downgrading of the federal government. Why? Because they're about to pass, or trying really hard to pass a budget. They're having a hard time passing it, but they're trying to pass a budget that would gut Medicaid for people in this country, right? Gut food assistance, gut funding for our communities, and still add $2.5 trillion to the federal deficit because they're trying to cut taxes for the very wealthy. I think we are the clearest opposition, the clearest sign of the kind of leaders that we want fighting for our communities, fighting for working people, in a contrast to what we're seeing from the federal government. And it's all thanks to you.
So I know that a lot of you still had questions and we couldn't call on everybody, but we'll stick around. I want to acknowledge hardworking Central Committee member Ed Fishman. Thank you for coming. Each of you on your chairs, we have, it's the best jar opener ever, or you can use it as a coaster or whatever. If you're not going to use it, leave it here because they're kind of expensive. But in any case, we are grateful for all of you for coming. Thank you for all you do. Let's stay active. Take care. Bye-bye.
Anybody who wants a copy of our detailed end of session letters,
And
Senator Kagan and I have hard copies in the back. You have